come in that way. So hi, welcome back. The other day, Donnie and I were driving somewhere. I don't remember where it was. We had to drive across the state or something. He picked me up kind of early in the morning. So neither of us were fully in conversational mode yet. After exchanging a couple of dozen words about where we were going in the morning, we fell in kind of a drowsy silence. Donnie negotiated traffic without a word, which is kind of unusual for him. And by the way, he's sitting right there and you can't see him, but you might hear him because he's the type who comments. That's a generous way of describing it. Whenever other drivers are a bit inattentive or just plain stupid. It's kind of fun to be a passenger normally, but he hadn't yet engaged and awakened to that level of talking yet. So 10 or 15 minutes passed as we were driving out of town and hitting the highway in relative silence kind of between us. And I leaned over to him, or I leaned back and looked over to him, and I said, why are you so grouchy? And he said, I'm not grouchy. And then I said, yes, you are. Well, no, I'm not. Oh, yes, you are. You're really, really grouchy. At some point, he started to laugh a little bit, and then he actually got a little bit defensive. I said, you're really grouchy. I was, of course, just messing with him, but I did it long enough that he actually became slightly defensive. Now, the defensive Donnie is also a fun kind of Donnie to be around in its own special way. So think about this. When was the last time that you felt defensive? Maybe it was today already. When was the last time you were working with someone who became defensive? So when we study the neurological and neurobiological activity of a defensive brain, we find that defensiveness activates the threat systems in the brain. The amygdala, for example, rapidly fires, and it tags input, any kind of input, as dangerous or ego-threatening. The hypothalamus triggers the HPA axis, releasing cortisol and adrenaline in two forms. The prefrontal cortex, that's this part right up here, especially the dorsolateral region, is that's responsible for reasoning and for empathy. It goes right out the door whenever we are feeling defensive. It kind of goes offline. The anterior cingulate cortex also detects social pain, and it starts to light up as though a person is actually being physically attacked. Cortisol and adrenaline surge, and it narrows our attention, and it biases the brain toward a defensive reaction. Dopamine drops, that reduces our curiosity, and it reduces our reward motivation. Serotonin and oxytocin decrease, that reduces our trust and our connection. And norepinephrine heightens our vigilance and prepares us to fight or to freeze or to flee. Functionally, defensiveness produces a psychological closed state. The brain prioritizes protection over exploration, and the amygdala hijacks, and it reduces empathy and complex reasoning. People misinterpret neutral cues even as threats when they're in a defensive state, and they justify their position and they reject any kind of feedback. And here's something else. Memory and learning decrease sharply because the hippocampus is inhibited by cortisol. Well, we've learned, and so have you, that genuine, respectful curiosity is the way to tip the scales and reverse all that I just described when we get into a defensive mode. So when studying the neurological activity and the neurobiological activity of the curious brain, we find that genuine curiosity activates the dopamine reward system instead of the threat system that we just talked about. There's three regions in the brain that actually do that, and in the case of these three regions of the brain, it helps us to experience curiosity as reward-based learning. We get into kind of a loop about that, and therefore it creates more curiosity. The more we learn, the more curious we get, the more curious we get, the more we learn, and the more we have these sensations of reward that come from discovering something new. The more reward, the more curious. You see how that loop starts to work. Dopamine begins to rise, that sharpens our attention, and it energizes our exploration. It enhances learning by signaling that something valuable is about to happen. Almost like wait for it, almost like someone handing you a wrapped present. It's kind of interesting because there's fascinating increases of neurochemicals in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex that heighten our focus and also heighten what's called memory encoding. Serotonin itself modulates patience, and then the HPA axis, which is like the stress system in our brain, remains very calm or only mildly activated. Reasoning stays fully engaged. Threat detection is quieted down or turned way down, and new information, rather than being seen as a threat, is easily linked to old rewarding and helpful information in our brain and our memory. We tend to feel, when we're curious, a pleasant sense of expectation is a good way to put that. So here's one of the most helpful things that we have learned when we study the defensive and curious brain side by side. I know leadership is hard, and if you could get good at this or even a little bit better at this, you'll find that this is a simple thing that will help you be more effective. That is, when you notice that you're getting defensive, deliberately get curious. Deliberately start looking at what would you like to know that you don't know. Notice your defensiveness. It's like grabbing the reins of a galloping horse. That horse is your brain. And then get that horse to slow down and turn into what's curious. Get genuinely curious. There's 6 things we found that are very helpful in doing that. Once you notice that you're defensive, announce your curiosity and try to leave your sarcasm behind, right? I'm curious about. Ask questions that clarify. You said this, what did that mean? Ask behavior-based questions. You did this, can you tell me more about that? Ask compare and contrast questions. And then ask, when have you seen this before? Or when have you seen that before? And ask impact questions. What's the impact of that? And then ask, finally, outcome questions. What kind of outcome do you want? Where do you want to be with this tomorrow? Tell me what the best future looks like for you. Those kind of questions. And when you grab the reins of this galloping, defensive, panicked horse of your brain, when you have a defensive reaction, and you slow it down and you spark genuine, respectful curiosity, you'll have a remarkably different experience. And you'll be a more effective leader, manager, supervisor, and your influence will end up being a positive one. So, what are you curious about? Back in the car with Donnie, I had so much fun with that now almost every time we go somewhere and he's quiet for more than 3 minutes, I'll say, why are you so grouchy? And he just laughs. Usually, sometimes he actually gets grouchy. And it makes me curious. Why does that make him so grouchy? Anyway, what do you think, Donnie? Is that true?
No.
Why are you so grouchy right now? Here's to you. All done.